Literary modernism, or modernist literature, has its origins in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, mainly in Europe and North America, and is characterized by a self-conscious break with traditional ways of writing, in both poetry and prose fiction. Modernists experimented with literary form and expression, adhering to Ezra Pound's maxim to make it new. This literary movement was driven by a conscious desire to overturn traditional modes of representation and express the new sensibilities of their time. The horrors of the First World War saw the prevailing assumptions about society reassessed, and modernist writers were influenced by such thinkers as Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx, amongst others, who raised questions about the rationality of the human mind. Origins and precursors. In the 1880s, increased attention was given to the idea that it was necessary to push aside previous norms entirely, instead of merely revising past knowledge in light of contemporary techniques. The theories of Sigmund Freud and Ernst Mach influenced early modernist literature. Mach argued that the mind had a fundamental structure, and that subjective experience was based on the interplay of parts of the mind in the science of mechanics. Freud's first major work was Studies on Hysteria. According to Freud, all subjective reality was based on the play of basic drives and instincts, through which the outside world was perceived. As a philosopher of science, Ernst Mach was a major influence on logical positivism, and through his criticism of Isaac Newton, a forerunner of Einstein's theory of relativity. Many prior theories about epistemology argued that external and absolute reality could impress itself, as it were, on an individual, as, for example, John Locke's empiricism, which saw the mind beginning as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. Freud's description of subjective states, involving an unconscious mind full of primal impulses and counterbalancing self-imposed restrictions, was combined by Carl Jung with the idea of the collective unconscious, which the conscious mind either fought or embraced, while Charles Darwin's work remade the Aristotelian concept of man, the animal, in the public mind. Jung suggested that human impulses toward breaking social norms were not the product of childishness or ignorance, but rather derived from the essential nature of the human animal. Another major precursor of modernism was Friedrich Nietzsche, especially his idea that psychological drives, specifically the will to power, were more important than facts or things. Henry Bergson, on the other hand, emphasized the difference between scientific clock time and a direct, subjective, human experience of time. His work on time and consciousness had a great influence on 20th-century novelists, especially those modernists who used the stream of consciousness technique, such as Dorothy Richardson for the book Pointed Roofs, James Joyce for Ulysses, and Virginia Woolf for Mrs. Dalloway and The Lighthouse. Also important in Bergson's philosophy was the idea of Elan Vital, the life force, which brings about a creative evolution of everything. His philosophy also placed a high value on intuition, though without rejecting the importance of the intellect. These various thinkers were united by distrust of Victorian positivism and certainty. Modernism as a literary movement can be seen also as a reaction to industrialization, urbanization, and new technologies. Important literary precursors of modernism were Fyodor Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, Walt Whitman, Charles Baudelaire, Rimbaud, August Strindberg, especially his later plays, including the trilogy to Damascus 1898–1901, A Dream Play, The Ghost Sonata. Initially, some modernists fostered a utopian spirit, stimulated by innovations in anthropology, psychology, philosophy, political theory, physics and psychoanalysis. The poets of the Imagist movement, founded by Ezra Pound in 1912 as a new poetic style, gave modernism its its early start in the 20th century, and were characterized by poetry that favored a precision of imagery, brevity, and free verse. This idealism, however, ended with the outbreak of World War I, and writers created more cynical works that reflected a prevailing sense of disillusionment. Many modernist writers also shared a mistrust of institutions of power such as government and religion, and rejected the notion of absolute truths. Modernist works such as T.S. Eliot's The Waste Land were increasingly self-aware, introspective, and explored the darker aspects of human nature. The term modernism covers a number of related and overlapping artistic and literary movements, including imagism, symbolism, futurism, vorticism, cubism, surrealism, expressionism, and Dada. Early modernist writers, especially those writing after World War I and the disillusionment that followed, broke the implicit contract with the general public that artists were the reliable interpreters and representatives of mainstream culture and ideas, and, instead, developed unreliable narrators, exposing the irrationality at the roots of a supposedly rational world. They also attempted to take into account changing ideas about reality developed by Darwin, Max, Freud, Einstein, Nietzsche, Bergson, and others. For this developed innovative literary techniques such as stream of consciousness, interior monologue, as well as the use of multiple points of view. This can reflect doubts about the philosophical basis of realism, or alternatively an expansion of our understanding of what is meant by realism, so that, for example, the use of stream of consciousness, or interior monologue reflects the need for greater psychological realism. It is debatable when the modernist literary movement began, though some have chosen 1910 as roughly marking the beginning and quote novelist Virginia Woolf, who declared that human nature underwent a fundamental change on or about December 1910. But modernism was already stirring by 1902, with works such as Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, while Alfred Jarry's absurdist play UBUR appeared even earlier, in 1896. Among early modernist non-literary landmarks is the atonal ending of Arnold Schoenberg's Second String Quartet in 1908. The expressionist paintings of Vasily Kandinsky starting in 1903 and culminating with his first abstract painting and the founding of the Expressionist Blue Rider Group in Munich in 1911, the rise of Fauvism, and the introduction of Cubism from the studios of Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque and others between 1900 and 1910. Sherwood Anderson's Winnisburg, Ohio is known as an early work of modernism for its plain-spoken prose style and emphasis on psychological insight into characters. James Joyce was a major modernist writer whose strategies employed in his novel Ulysses for depicting the events during a 24-hour period in the life of his protagonist, Leopold Bloom, have come to epitomize modernism's approach to fiction. The poet T.S. Eliot described these qualities in 1923, noting that Joyce's technique is a way of controlling, of ordering, of giving a shape and a significance to the immense panorama of futility and anarchy which is contemporary history. Instead of narrative method, we may now use the mythical method. It is, I seriously believe, a step toward making the modern world possible for art. Eliot's own modernist poem The Waste Land mirrors the futility and anarchy, in its own way, in its fragmented structure, and the absence of an obvious central, unifying narrative. This is in fact a rhetorical technique to convey the poem's theme, the decay and fragmentation of Western culture. The poem, despite the absence of a linear narrative, does have a structure. This is provided by both fertility symbolism derived from anthropology, and other elements such as the use of quotations and juxtaposition. Modernist literature addressed similar aesthetic problems as contemporary modernist art. Gertrude Stein's abstract writings, for example, have been compared to the fragmentary and multi-perspective cubist paintings of her friend Pablo Picasso. The questioning spirit of modernism, as part of a necessary search for ways to make sense of a broken world, can also be seen in a different form in the Scottish poet Hugh MacDiarmid's A Drunk Man Looks at the Thistle. In this poem, MacDiarmid applies Eliot's techniques to respond to the question of nationalism, using comedic parody, in an optimistic form of modernism in which the artist as hero seeks to embrace complexity and locate new meanings. Other early modernist writers and selected works include Luigi Pirandello, the late Mattia Pascal, Six Characters in Search of an Author, Rainer Maria Rilke, The Notebooks of Malte Lourdes Brigg, Sonnets to Orpheus, Duino Elegies, Guillaume Apollinaire Algals, André Belly, Petersburg, Georg Trakl, Poems, Franz Kafka, The Metamorphosis, The Trial, The Castle, Konstantin Gamsakhurdia, The Smile of Dionysus, Kidnapping the Moon, The Right Hand of the Grand Master, Grigol Robakizet, The Snake's Skin, Miroslav Kryleza, Cristoforo Colombo, Michelangelo Buonarroti, Povratak Filipa Latinovica, Wyndham Lewis, Tar, Karl Capek, RUR, Itlos Vevo, Zeno's Conscience, Ryanosuke Akutagawa, Hana, Rashomon, Inagro. Continuation, 1920s and 1930s. Significant modernist works continued to be created in the 1920s and 1930s, including further novels by Marcel Proust, Virginia Woolf, Robert Musil, and Dorothy Richardson. The American modernist dramatist Eugene O'Neill's career began in 1914, but his major works appeared in the 1920s and 1930s and early 1940s. Two other significant modernist dramatists writing in the 1920s and 1930s were Bertolt Brecht and Federico Garcia Lorca. D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover was published in 1928, while another important landmark for the history of the modern novel came with the publication of William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury in 1929. In the 1930s, in addition to further major works by Faulkner, Samuel Beckett published his first major work, the novel Murphy, while in 1932 John Cowper Powys published a Glastonbury romance, the same year as Herman Brock's The Sleepwalker. One of greatest achievement in modernist poetry is then followed by Miroslav Kryleza's Ballads of Petrika Karimpa in 1936. Then in 1939 James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake appeared. It was in this year that another Irish modernist, W.B. Yeats, died. In poetry, T.S. Eliot, E. Cummings, and Wallace Stevens continued writing from the 1920s until the 1950s, while modernist poetry in English is often viewed as an American phenomenon, with leading exponents including Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Hart Crane, Marianne Moore, William Carlos Williams, H.D., and Louis Zukofsky. There were important British modernist poets, including David Jones, Hugh MacDiarmid, Basil Bunting, and W.H. Auden. European modernist poets include Federico Garcia Lorca, Anna Akhmatova, Konstantin Cavafy, and Paul Valéry. Other modernist writers. List of modernist writers. List of modernist women writers. List of English-language first- and second-generation modernist writers.